Zane sat at the edge of his bed, his breath shallow as he fought the uncontrollable hunger gnawing at him from within. It was only a few days ago that his life had been normal: school, friends, and the usual teenage worries. But now, everything had changed. He was no longer the boy he used to be. Ever since that fateful night when he had been attacked by something or someone in the dark alley, the hunger had been growing. At first, it had been subtle, just a lingering thirst he couldn't quench. Water didn't help, nor did soda or juice. Even his favorite meals left him unsatisfied, the taste of food turning bland and dull. Zane hadn't connected the dots until the dreams began, dreams of blood, sharp teeth, and darkness. The realization had come like a punch to the gut. He was turning into a vampire. His reflection had started changing too. His once bright green eyes had taken on a strange golden hue, and his skin had grown paler each day. But worst of all were the fangs. They weren't fully grown yet, but they were there, small, sharp points that poked at his bottom lip when he bit down. He tried to ignore it, tried to carry on as though everything was fine. But the cravings were getting stronger, and each day it became harder to resist. That morning, he stood in the kitchen, staring at a plate of food. His mom had left him breakfast before heading to work, but the sight of scrambled eggs and toast made his stomach churn. His hand shook as he reached for a glass of water, hoping it would help. But after taking a sip, the glass slipped from his grasp and shattered on the floor. Zane cursed under his breath, overwhelmed by the intensity of his hunger. He clenched his fists, trying to control the tremors in his body, and told himself he could handle it. But deep down, he knew that was a lie. Later that day, Claire, his best friend, knocked on his door. He hadn't seen her in days, avoiding her texts and calls, knowing he couldn't explain what was happening to him. But Claire wasn't the type to let things go, and when she showed up, concern etched across her face, Zane tried his best to act normal. They decided to take a walk, hoping that being out in the fresh air would distract him from the gnawing thirst. As they strolled through the park, Zane could barely focus on their conversation. Claire kept asking if he was okay, but all Zane could think about was the pulse of blood he could hear from everyone around him, the joggers, the kids playing, even the birds in the trees. His senses were sharper now, every sound and smell amplified, and he was drowning in it. It happened without warning. A small cut on Claire's hand, barely noticeable, sent a rush of desire through Zane's body. The scent of blood, faint but unmistakable, made him freeze. His eyes locked onto her hand, his vision tunneling as his instincts screamed at him to act. He clenched his fists and turned away, fighting the urge with every ounce of willpower he had left. Claire, oblivious to the danger, kept talking, unaware of the battle raging inside her friend. Zane knew he couldn't keep this up. He was losing control, and it was only a matter of time before he did something he couldn't take back. That evening, as the sun began to set, Zane found himself wandering aimlessly until he reached the alley where it had all started. He stood there, staring into the shadows, hoping for answers, when a voice cut through the silence. "You're struggling, aren't you?" Zane spun around, startled. Standing behind him was a man, tall and imposing, with sharp features and a piercing gaze. His presence was almost suffocating, and Zane instinctively took a step back. The man smiled, but it was a cold, knowing smile. "You're not alone, Zane. I've been watching you." "Who are you?" Zane asked, his voice shaky. The man stepped closer, his movements smooth and deliberate. "My name is Marcus. I've been where you are now. The hunger, the confusion, the fear, it's all part of the change. You're becoming one of us." Zane's heart pounded in his chest. "Us?" "A vampire," Marcus said bluntly. "And if you don't learn how to control it, the hunger will consume you." Zane felt a chill run down his spine. "I don't want this. I didn't ask for any of this." "No one ever does," Marcus replied, his expression softening. "But it's happening, and you need to learn how to survive. I can teach you." Zane hesitated, unsure of whether he could trust this stranger. But what choice did he have? If he didn't get control soon, someone would get hurt, maybe even Claire. With a deep breath, he nodded. Marcus led Zane to an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place was dark and abandoned, but it was clear that Marcus had made it his home. Inside, Marcus began Zane's training. He taught Zane how to control his powers, how to manage the hunger without letting it consume him. But it wasn't easy. Zane struggled with every lesson, the thirst for blood a constant distraction. Marcus provided him with blood packs, telling him it was a temporary solution until he could hunt responsibly. But the very thought of feeding off another living being made Zane sick to his core. Days passed, and Zane's training continued. He learned about vampire lore, about the ancient rules that govern their existence, and about the dangers that came with their powers. But most importantly, he learned that he wasn't alone. Marcus revealed that there were others like them, scattered across the world, hiding in plain sight. Some embraced their nature, while others like Zane fought against it. But as much as Zane learned, the hardest lesson was yet to come. One night, as he stood in front of his mirror, his reflection staring back at him, he saw the truth. His transformation was nearly complete. His eyes were now a deep, unnatural shade of gold, and his fangs were fully formed. The boy he had once been was gone, replaced by something he didn't recognize. He touched his face, feeling the coldness of his skin, and a wave of despair washed over him. This was his reality now. There was no going back. A text from Claire snapped him out of his thoughts. She was worried about him, asking where he'd been and why he hadn't been around. Zane's chest tightened with guilt. He knew he couldn't see her, not anymore. She was too important to him, and he couldn't risk hurting her. But how could he explain that to her? The next day, Zane returned to Marcus, seeking advice. Marcus offered him a choice: fully embrace his new life and all the power that came with it, or continue to fight it and risk losing control. It was a choice Zane didn't want to make. He didn't want to lose his humanity, but he also didn't want to hurt the people he cared about. As Zane stood in the warehouse, torn between the two paths before him, he realized something. His powers were a part of him now, whether he liked it or not. But how he used them was up to him. He didn't have to become a monster. He could be more than that. He could protect the people he loved, even if it meant keeping his distance. With renewed determination, Zane made his decision. He would learn to control his powers, but he wouldn't let them define him. He would fight the hunger, fight the darkness inside him, and hold on to whatever humanity he had left, because, in the end, that was what made him Zane. And as he looked out at the setting sun, he knew that his journey was only just beginning.